Georgia cornerback Jaheim Singletary. This guy, he covers you like a blanket. He's a former 5-star recruit. I don't know why he's decided to leave Georgia, but he is maybe the best player in the portal. Like this is a solid player, former 5-star recruit. Now there is a Miami connection because Jamil Adai, Miami's defensive backs coach, was his primary recruiter to Georgia, Blue. So do you think there could be any smoke there? And you know, I'm not going to ask you if Miami could use a player like this because any team in the country could. But, I mean, how could he fit in at Miami?
He was my number one player coming out of high school in Jacksonville. And I'll tell you what, the kid was a beast. And I watched him, and you know what? He considered Miami early on. I remember that, you know, there was a lot of the guys talking about him coming down, you know, to play down here. And he says, you know what? I love it down there, but right now I'm going to go. I still remember because when I saw him as a sophomore, and I said, wow, this kid's going to be special. And then I kept following him, and I said, you know what? He's as good. It's like Brandon Innes. A lot of people look at a guy like that, and they kind of take him for granted because he started since the 8th grade. I mean, you just don't come across athletes like that. And Jaheim is the same way. I mean, tremendous secondary kid, leaders, got everything. He's got speed. He's got athletic ability. And that's why he went to Georgia. But I definitely think Miami could be in play here because of the fact that he was interested in them at the beginning. You go back and look at, you know, his choices coming out of high school, and Miami was right there. And that was a Miami team that had very little to talk about for the future like this one does.
If Miami were to lose Cormani McClain, I wouldn't lose a second of sleep over that if they're able to land Jaheim Singletary in the transfer portal. Now, John, I had a conversation. The conversation was on air and off air. We talked a lot about these two corners, Larry Blustein and I, earlier today. And, you know, Blue, who watches more high school games than anybody, he actually is a lot more sold on Jaheim Singletary than he is on Cormani McClain. Now, Singletary, he announced he's going to hit the portal. That's going to become official, I think, tomorrow, right? That he can officially hit the portal. He's going to have suitors all over the country. This is a former 5-star recruit. He's going to be wined and dined or, you know, sweet talked by all the big programs in the country. There is a Miami connection, a couple of them for him, though. Miami was one of the schools he considered before he ultimately chose Georgia. And his primary recruiter at Georgia, Jamil Adai, is now the defensive backs coach at Miami. So it at least makes me feel like Miami's got a shot here.
Not to mention, look, one of his last visits was out to Oregon in high school. So Mario Cristobal has hosted Jaheim Singletary personally at least one time. Look, I think, first of all, comparing the two is fascinating because they're very similar, right? Bigger, longer corners with a wide receiver background, ball skills, and confidence. All those boxes are checked with both of those guys. But Jaheim, a little bit taller, a little bit bigger, and obviously older, more experienced, with 4 years of eligibility still to his name. Yeah, you could make that one-to-one comparison, both, of course, from the state of Florida as well. Singletary's roots are up in Jacksonville. So that's a fascinating, you know, trade-off in theory. But look, you know, what I know from the schools involved with Jaheim, like you said, it's going to be a lot of schools, and this thing could move pretty quickly relative to visits. I've heard some outlandish offers relative to getting him on campus, which is just the nature of the portal, especially with the window closing on January 18th. But Miami's going to be in this thing regardless of Cormani McClain, regardless of the other circumstances, because as far as I know with Jaheim, this is about seeing the field. This is about playing time. This is about an opportunity. And obviously at Miami, there's a glaring need. And obviously the connections speak for themselves. You mentioned the Adai. I mean, that's his guy. I mean, that was, you know, Jaheim was committed to Ohio State. They had a coaching change and things really opened up. And it was like Florida versus Georgia for him. And Adai was a big reason why Georgia won out initially compared to then Dan Mullen's staff at UF. So I think that's huge in terms of continuity and what he's looking for. When you make a change like this, there is a finality to it. You know, he wasn't in college in 2020. He doesn't get the COVID year. And this is it, right? It's like the one-time transfer rule. I had a coach tell me, and he'll be in the Power 5 next year. He said, look, you don't need to win the first recruitment. You need to win the second recruitment, because then the kids can't move unless they want to sit out for a year, which no kid wants to do. And I know Jaheim personally, competitively, he ain't sitting out. So this is it for him. So there is this sense of finality that could maybe elongate the process and allow him to dig a little bit deeper in that search for opportunity and comfort. And Miami is going to provide both of those things in addition to familiarity. As you mentioned, Miami, independent of Cristobal, independent of Addae, was involved heavily for Singletary throughout his recruitment. And he's one of these guys that was on the radar very early as a high school freshman. So that was a long-standing relationship and a trip that he made from Jacksonville to Coral Gables. So Miami's going to be in this race today and probably throughout this transfer decision, but it will absolutely be hotly contested. I've heard Tennessee, I've heard Oklahoma, Florida, which was a big contender early on for him as well, all going to be involved in this thing. And that list is only going to grow once he actually can communicate with some of these programs.